The air in the cave was cold and thick, a suffocating presence that clung to Ethan and Kate like a damp shroud. They had escaped the creature, for now, but the gnawing dread of the unknown still pressed in on them. The heart of Millbrook Haven's terror lay somewhere deep within this mountain, and they were closer to it than ever before. Ethan's thoughts raced as they moved deeper into the cave, the walls closing in, their jagged surfaces glistening with a black, viscous substance that seemed to pulse as if alive. What had once been a mining town was now the cradle of an ancient evil, something far older than Millbrook Haven itself. Something that had been awakened and was now spreading like a disease. "We have to find the source," Ethan whispered, gripping the flashlight tightly. Its beam cut through the darkness ahead, but it only revealed more of the same. Endless tunnel, slick with the black sludge. Kate's face was pale, her breathing shallow, but she nodded, her eyes locked on the path ahead. "Do you think it's the thing the man in the woods was talking about?" Ethan didn't answer right away. The man they had encountered had been mad, half consumed by the infection spreading through the town. His ramblings about the thing beneath haunted Ethan, even now. Was this really something they could fight? Or were they walking into their doom? "I don't know," he finally said, glancing at her. "But if we don't stop it, there won't be anything left to save. We need to try." The further they ventured into the cave, the more the temperature dropped. Their breath turned to mist, and the air took on a strange, metallic scent that sent shivers down Ethan's spine. The ground beneath them had changed too. What had once been stone was now soft and yielding, almost like flesh, and with each step, they sank deeper into the strange material. "This isn't right," Kate murmured, her voice trembling. "The ground. It feels like we're walking on." "Don't," Ethan cut her off, his stomach turning. He didn't want to acknowledge the possibility that they were no longer walking on rock, but on something living, something that had been growing beneath Millbrook Haven for centuries. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up into a vast chamber, and both of them froze in their tracks. Before them was something that defied explanation. A grotesque, pulsating mass of darkness that spread across the floor, the walls, and the ceiling, like a living organism. The black sludge that had tainted the town was here in its purest form, and it writhed with unnatural life. In the center of the chamber, rising from the writhing blackness, was what could only be described as a heart, a massive, organic structure that pulsed rhythmically, each beat sending ripples through the black mass that covered the cavern. Tendrils of darkness extended from the heart, snaking into the walls of the cave, disappearing into the earth beyond. This was the source, the thing that had infected Millbrook Haven. "This is it," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is what's been controlling everything." Kate took a step forward, her face twisted with revulsion. "It's alive," she said, her voice trembling. "How do we stop something like this?" Ethan scanned the room, his mind racing. The heart was massive, far too large for them to destroy with the limited resources they had. But they couldn't leave. Not now. If they didn't destroy this thing, it would continue to grow, continue to consume everything in its path until there was nothing left of Millbrook Haven, or the world beyond it. "We need to burn it," Ethan said, his voice hard. "Fire is the only thing that can kill something like this." Kate nodded, though her face was pale. "Do you have anything?" Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out the small canister of lighter fluid he had taken from Kate's house earlier. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. He also had his lighter, the same one he'd carried since their parents had died. The weight of it in his hand felt heavy now, as though it were the key to something much larger than himself. "I'll pour this over the heart," Ethan said, moving toward the grotesque mass. "When I light it, we need to run. The whole place could come down." But before he could take another step, the black mass shifted. Tendrils rose from the floor, slithering through the air like snakes, their movements disturbingly precise. One of them lashed out, wrapping around Ethan's ankle and pulling him off his feet. He hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. "Ethan!" Kate screamed, rushing toward him, but the tendrils were faster. They slithered up his legs, coiling around his arms and chest, pinning him to the ground. Ethan struggled, but the more he fought, the tighter the tendrils squeezed. their touch cold and wet against his skin. The black mass pulsed beneath him, as though feeding off his fear. "Get out of here!" he shouted, gasping for breath. "Run!" But Kate didn't move. Instead, she grabbed the pipe Ethan had dropped and swung it at the tendrils, trying to free him. The metal connected with a sickening crack, and one of the tendrils recoiled. But more took its place, lashing out and pulling Kate to the ground beside him. The black sludge surged forward, enveloping both of them. It was like being submerged in cold, wet mud, the air thick and impossible to breathe. Ethan gasped, choking on the blackness as it filled his mouth, his nose, his lungs. For a moment, everything went black. But then, through the suffocating darkness, he heard something. A voice, deep and guttural, speaking words he couldn't understand. The words reverberated through the mass, vibrating in his skull, as though the very cave was speaking to him. He opened his eyes that should have been blind in the darkness but weren't. Before him, through the black mass, he saw something. A figure, human, but not. Its body was covered in the same dark substance, its eyes black pits, its limbs elongated and twisted. It was the thing from the cave, the thing that had been controlling everything. "You cannot stop what has begun," the voice said, though its mouth didn't move. The words echoed in Ethan's mind, the weight of them crushing. "I have been here long before your kind, and I will be here long after." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. This was the source, the mind behind the infection. The black heart that had taken over Millbrook Haven was merely an extension of this ancient, malevolent entity. "You cannot stop me," it said again, "but you can join me. Become part of the new world." The words filled Ethan with dread, but there was something else, too. A pull, deep inside him. A dark temptation. The entity wasn't just threatening him. It was offering him something. A place in its new world. A place in the darkness. "No," Ethan shouted, his voice hoarse. "I won't be part of this." He struggled against the tendrils, his body screaming in protest as the black mass tightened its grip. But through the darkness, he saw Kate, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. She was still conscious, still fighting, but barely. The tendrils were wrapping around her neck now, cutting off her air. Ethan's heart surged with panic. He couldn't let her die. Not like this. With a surge of adrenaline, he reached for the lighter in his pocket. His fingers fumbled, slick with the black sludge, but he managed to pull it out. His thumb flicked the wheel, sparking the flame to life. The entity hissed, recoiling as the light flickered in the darkness. "You cannot escape me," the voice growled, but there was a hint of fear in its tone now. Ethan's hand shook as he brought the lighter to the tendrils. "Watch me," he spat. The flame touched the black sludge, and for a moment, nothing happened. But then, with a loud crack, the tendrils ignited, fire racing across the mass like a wildfire. The heat was immediate, searing, and the entity let out a deafening scream. A sound so inhuman it rattled the cave walls. The tendrils around Ethan and Kate loosened, and they fell to the ground, gasping for air. But the fire was spreading quickly now, consuming the heart, the walls, everything. The cave rumbled, chunks of rock falling from the ceiling as the flames grew hotter, brighter. "Go," Ethan shouted, pulling Kate to her feet. "We have to get out of here." They stumbled through the tunnel, the fire at their backs, the cave collapsing around them. Every step was a battle, their bodies weak and battered, but they kept moving. The entrance was close. Ethan could see the faint light of the outside world growing closer with each step. Finally, they burst out of the cave, collapsing onto the ground just as the entrance caved in behind them. Dust and ash filled the air, the roar of the collapsing cave echoing through the forest. For a long time, they just lay there, gasping for breath, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and shock. The fire was still burning deep inside the cave, but the entity, the heart of the infection, was gone, destroyed. "We did it," Kate whispered. "We did it," Kate whispered, her voice barely audible. She lay on her back, staring up at the sky, which was now tinged with the orange glow of the fire deep within the cave. Her chest heaved with each breath, her body trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. Ethan lay beside her, staring up at the same sky, his mind spinning with everything they had just survived. The oppressive weight of the cave's darkness was gone, but the echoes of what they had faced remained in his chest, like a wound that had yet to heal. The fire crackled beneath the earth, but it was fading, slowly being swallowed by the rocks and the dirt. The black sludge that had oozed from the ground was gone, leaving only scorched earth and the smell of smoke. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, both too stunned to fully grasp what had just happened. "Is it really over?" Kate asked after a while, her voice shaky. Her eyes flickered toward the smoldering remains of the cave entrance, as if she expected the black mass to re-emerge, stronger than before. Ethan sat up slowly, his body aching with every movement. He glanced toward the collapsed entrance and felt a strange sense of unease. "I think so," he said, but his voice held uncertainty. "We destroyed the heart. We burned it." He didn't say what he was really thinking. Even though the heart was gone, even though they had set the fire that had reduced the ancient mass to ash, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something remained. The entity's words echoed in his mind. "I have been here long before your kind, and I will be here long after." Kate pushed herself up beside him, wincing from the bruises that covered her body. She glanced at him, her eyes searching his face for reassurance. "Do you really think it's over?" she pressed. Ethan hesitated, not wanting to scare her. They had fought so hard, and now that they were free, they both needed to believe it was finished. But he couldn't lie to her. "I hope so," he said quietly, looking away from her and back to the forest beyond the cave. The trees stood silent and still, but there was a weight in the air, like a bruise that had yet to fade. Kate shivered, rubbing her arms as if the cold October air had only just begun to reach her. She was silent for a moment before she spoke again. "What was that thing, Ethan? What did we really destroy?" Ethan shook his head. He had no real answer. The heart, the black sludge, the thing that had twisted Millbrook Haven. All of it had felt ancient, powerful, something not meant to be disturbed. "I don't know," he admitted. "Whatever it was, it had been here for centuries, maybe longer. The town must have dug too deep and woke it up." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, they both sat in silence, letting the reality of what they had survived sink in. The town of Millbrook Haven was gone, its people either consumed by the infection or twisted into something no longer human. And now, the cave, the heart of it all, was buried, destroyed by their fire. But the horror of what they had witnessed lingered like a shadow, a presence neither of them could shake. "Do you think?" Kate hesitated, glancing at him. "Do you think it could come back?" Ethan looked at her, seeing the fear in her eyes, the same fear he felt deep in his own chest. He didn't want to answer, but he couldn't ignore the question. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I hope not. But something like that. It's older than we can understand. It was sealed away once before. Maybe now, it's gone for good. Or maybe—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Kate didn't push him for an answer. She simply nodded, accepting the uncertainty. "We need to get out of here," Ethan said after a long pause. "The cave's gone, but this place, it's still dangerous. There could be more out there. More creatures, more of whatever that was." Kate nodded. "But where do we go?" Ethan thought for a moment. The nearest town was miles away, and their car was back in Millbrook Haven, which was now a ghost town, or worse, a graveyard. But staying here, so close to the cave, felt like an invitation for more horror. "Let's head to the highway," he said, making a decision. "If we can get to the main road, we can flag someone down. Maybe we can get help." Together, they stood, their bodies sore and aching but driven by the need to put as much distance between themselves and the cave as possible. The forest was still eerily quiet, but the further they walked, the more normal the world began to feel. The oppressive weight that had clung to them for so long began to lift, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, they could hear the faint chirping of birds in the distance. It was a small comfort, but it was something. As they made their way through the forest, the ground under their feet felt solid again, earth and stone, not the strange, pulsing mass they had walked on before. The black sludge was gone, and the trees no longer carried the strange sheen of infection. It was as if the fire they had set had cleansed the land itself, but still, the unease lingered. After what felt like hours of walking, they finally reached the edge of the forest. The dirt path gave way to cracked asphalt, and the highway stretched out before them, empty and silent. There were no cars, no signs of life, but it was a relief just to see the open road. "Thank God," Kate whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan nodded, glancing up and down the highway. "We'll walk until we find someone," he said, though he wasn't sure how far they'd have to go. The nearest town was at least 10 miles away, and they had no way of knowing how long it would take to reach help. But they had made it this far, and they weren't about to give up now. They walked along the side of the road, their footsteps the only sound in the eerie stillness. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the pavement, and the chill of the evening air bit at their skin. But as the light faded, so did their sense of relief. Ethan glanced back over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing as something caught his attention. In the distance, near the edge of the forest they had just left, a faint shape moved. It was far off, barely visible in the twilight, but it was there. Something black and shifting, like a figure standing at the tree line. "Do you see that?" he asked, his voice tense. Kate stopped, following his gaze. Her eyes widened as she saw it too. "What is that?" Ethan didn't answer, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure didn't move, but it didn't disappear either. It simply stood there, watching them from the distance, a dark silhouette against the fading light. "We need to keep moving," Ethan said, his voice tight. "Now." They quickened their pace, their eyes flicking back toward the figure every few seconds. It didn't follow them, but it didn't vanish either. It remained at the edge of the forest, a silent sentinel, watching them as they fled. As night fell, the figure finally disappeared into the darkness, but the fear it had planted in their hearts lingered. They walked for hours, the road stretching on endlessly before them. Eventually, the headlights of a truck appeared in the distance, and they waved it down, grateful for the sight of another human being. The driver, an older man with a kind face, pulled over and offered them a ride to the nearest town. As they climbed into the truck, Ethan glanced back one last time at the road behind them, half expecting to see the figure again, standing there in the darkness, watching. But the road was empty. Thank you for watching the final part of the Shadows of Millbrook Haven. Ethan and Kate may have escaped for now, but the darkness they left behind is still out there, waiting in the shadows. If you enjoyed this suspenseful horror journey, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for more horror, mystery, and suspense. There's always something lurking just out of sight.